We're looking into Article 1 of the Iccpr, and the article reads as follows: All peoples have the right of self determination. So we clearly see that the subject or the player being brought forth in this article of law is peoples. And the right that the peoples have indicated in this article is self determination. Self determination is the most basic fundamental human right that an individual can express and can exercise. In essence, right, it's the power to make your own determinations, to make your own choices, not being influenced by any exterior power. Now, I want you to notice in particular here, right, that the subject or the player is peoples. It's not citizen, it's not everyone, it's not persons, but it's peoples. And they did this on purpose. They used this subject or designation on purpose. Now, I want you to take further note, right, that the article of law doesn't read like this: all peoples have a right of self determination, but it clearly states that all peoples have the right to self determination. Not a right, but the right. When you're operating from the capacity as a driver, do you have the right of self determination, or do you have a right of self determination? As a driver, you have a right of self determination, but not the right to self determination. Because the state party can come by, right, and make determinations for you. Well, you can't go over 50 on this road, and you can't go over 100 on this road, and you have to wear your seatbelt when you're in your vehicle. So they are making the determinations for you. When you're operating as the statutory creature, the student, do you have the right of self determination or a right of self determination? As a student, just as a driver, you are only expressing a right of self determination, not the complete right of self determination. And just to bang this home, as a fisherman, right, you are not operating the right to self determination, but you are operating a qualified right of determination, because the state party will tell you you need to have a license. You can only take so many fish out of the body of water. You can only fish at certain times. So they are making the determinations for you. A statutory creature does not have the right to self determination. It has a right to self determination, a limited and qualified right. But yet, here in Article 1, right, the right to self determination is not qualified. It's not a right, it's the right. So we have to figure out which player in law, which subject in law has the ability to operate the right of self determination, the complete right. And for that understanding, we jump back into the last video that I made, where we came to see that the human being, the man or the woman, is the one in law that holds the right of self determination, that has the right of self determination. And that right to self determination can never be limited or abridged. It's not like a statutory creature, which can be limited or abridged. The article of law goes on to further say, by virtue of that right, what right are they talking about? Well, the right to self determination. So, by virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status. All right, who is the they? The they is referring back to peoples. And since we already concluded that this subject or player peoples has the right of self determination, not a right of self determination, and the only player or subject in law that has the right of self determination is a man or a woman. So therefore, the they are referring to is a man or a woman. Now we're looking at the preamble of the Iccpr, and it states recognizing that in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the ideal of free human beings. So the subject and the player right now is human beings, man or woman, enjoying civil and political freedom and freedom from fear and want can only be achieved if conditions are created whereby everyone may enjoy his civil and political rights as well as his economic and social cultural rights. So we're clearly seeing, right, that the one who has the civil and political rights and the one that has the economic, social, and cultural rights is the man and the woman. For the personal pronoun is his, and it states human beings, everyone, and we know everyone refers to the man or the woman, and then the personal pronoun is his. Now, when we come back to Article 1, we see that all peoples have the right of self-determination. And we understand that the only one that can express the right of self-determination is a man or a woman. And by virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And we further came to see that the one who is freely determining their political status and freely pursuing their economic, social, and cultural development is indeed the man or woman, the his or her. So we understand that all peoples is definitely referring to the individual man or woman. Now, the article of law goes on to say all peoples, the man or the woman, may for their own ends freely dispose of their natural wealth and resources without prejudice to any obligations based upon the principle of mutual benefit. So the law entitles you to freely dispose of your natural wealth and resources, that you have no obligation to contribute based upon the principle of mutual benefit, which is what taxation is. And further to that, it says, in no case may a people be deprived of its own means of subsistence. So there is no operation of law that can be put in place that allows you to be deprived of your own means of subsistence. There's no operation of law that can be put in place that forces you to dispose of your natural wealth and resources based upon the principle of mutual benefit. And this is the true operation of the right of self determination. This is the power and the structure and the nature and the attributes of the right of self determination. And this right only operates for a man or a woman in law. So, this is your fundamental human right as expressed in the International Covenant. And this fundamental human right places an obligation upon the government to respect and ensure that right. Now, Article 5 of the Iccpr says nothing in the present covenant may be interpreted as implying for any state, which is the domestic government, group, or person, any right to engage in any activity or perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms recognized herein, or at their limitation to a greater extent than is provided for in the present covenant. And in Article 1, there is no limitation that can be placed against that right, because it does not directly say that this right that we are enumerating and mentioning here in Article 1 is subject to limitation. Therefore, it is not subject to limitation. And why is it not subject to limitation? Well, a man or a woman's right of self determination can never be limited or abridged. And that operation of law is expressed clearly in Article 1 by not providing for a limitation. When we understand this, then we clearly see that the governments are actually placing limitations and abridgments upon our human rights. And they're doing so contrary to the operations of law, contrary to the principles of justice that bind their own actions. They are placing impositions upon you. They are placing duties and obligations upon you that are contrary to your fundamental human rights, that are contrary to the rule of law. The laws that bind the government bodies state that as a man or woman, you have the right to self determination. And as a man or woman, you do not have to contribute any of your wealth that you create through your hard earned energy to a government system based upon the principle of mutual benefit. But they still create domestic laws and try and override your rights illegally. So the next question becomes, well, what should I do? What do I have to do? What can I do? Because I see that my human rights and freedoms are being limited and abridged, and what they're doing to me is actually against the law. Well, the first thing you need to do is notify them and take back your position in law before them. Article 16 of the Iccpr states that everyone, we talked about this in my last video, the human being, the man or the woman, shall have the right to recognition as that man or woman before the law. It doesn't say you are automatically granted the right. It says that you have the right to recognition, and a right is something you must exercise. This is where a claim of recognition comes into play. It's the document that you send to the government that invokes your right to recognition as that man or woman before the law, and not as a statutory creature before the law. And if you fail to provide said documentation, right, they will continue to assume implicit consent. They will continue to apply their laws against you and recognize you only as that statutory creature, thereby destroying your right to self determination and destroying your other absolute rights. And some will say, well, that's evil what they're doing. Look what they're doing. And yes, I agree, that's evil. But the law doesn't automatically provide your recognition. That's what you need to understand. You think just because these rights exist that they automatically have to recognize them. No, no right works like that. No right at all. If you want a right to operate on your behalf, you have to exercise the right. And by not sending your claim of recognition to the government and not invoking your fundamental human rights, well, then you're not exercising them. And further to that, you're letting them get away with taking actions aimed at the destruction of your human rights, all because you have not said anything. On my page at eternallyaware.com, designated claim of recognition page, you can acquire a claim of recognition there that is to be signed and sent to the government. And this documentation is meant to have the effect of notifying the government that you are aware of what they are doing and that you are now claiming and standing upon all your absolute fundamental human rights, that you will no longer accept to be recognized in law and before them as a statutory creature, but you are demanding and requesting and telling them that when you deal with me and when you talk to me and when you have interactions with me from now on, I'm standing only in my natural personhood. I'm standing only as a man or woman with all of my absolute fundamental freedoms intact, not limited or abridged. And if at that point the government continues to try and limit and abridge your rights, well, you have a legal operation of law to prove that you already notified the government, Therefore, their continued action is their self destruction. Their continued movement against your rights is their open violation against the covenants. And while perhaps it may take a greater means of enforcement against the government to stop them from their actions, your claim of recognition is your starting point. Your claim of recognition is the start of your journey against the government to notify them and let them know that your actions are illegal. And if you persist within your actions, then you are already documented as causing a tort and a damage against me. And my subsequent enforcement against you is already proven on my behalf. If you do not put a claim of recognition in play, don't ask me how you can enforce your rights. Don't ask me about what court or what operation of law you can do. Don't come on my channel and place messages complaining about the government and complaining about the situation if you haven't taken any action to exercise your right. Within the next couple of months, I intend to share the principles of justice, the rule of law, and the operations of law on how to enforce your rights against the domestic government. But even at that, your ability to enforce your right will not bypass or skip the initial process of sending a proper claim of recognition built through the principles of justice to the government to commence your start of exercising your absolute rights. So I encourage you to go and get a claim of recognition from my website. Sign your John Hancock on that document. Study it and understand and learn the principles contained therein. And send that document to the Attorney General of Canada as your first step in exercising your rights, as your initial step to exercising your rights, your absolute fundamental rights. Failing in this action, then, before the law, means you are not exercising your rights. You are allowing them to limit and abridge your human rights without saying anything to them. I hope this video helped you to understand your position and your standing in law based upon the principles of justice. And I hope it motivates you to take action to exercise your right, because only you can do it.